Okay, so I know we went over that fast. Are there any questions about any of these? Hopefully you've heard them before. And like I said, normally we would talk about them longer, demonstrate them, provide examples. I'm really gonna try and model as much as I can for you. Things that should be happening at your school if you're interested in RJ, within your staff, and with youth. So agreements are huge. Another thing we always do when we work with folks is do a land acknowledgement. So just bear with me for a second while I read this. We acknowledge that Santa Clara County is the Aboriginal home of the Tamian Nation since time immemorial and recognizes the continued persistence and resilience of culture and community despite the adverse impacts of settler colonialism. Relationship with the land, one of deep respect, reciprocity, collaborate, help maintain balance. SEEDS acknowledges and supports Tambian the nation in solidarity and commitment to partnership and advocating for a more equitable and inclusive future. Like I said, we do land acknowledgements everywhere we go. We share with participants. There's a locator online where you can go in and find out exactly like what tribe's land you were on. Why do you think we do this? If we're an RJ organization helping folks with implementing it, why do you think for us we really support this practice? Yeah? Yes. Yeah, RJ is all about accountability. It's like one of the central tenets. And so if we're not taking accountability for like what has happened, then we don't have a strong foundation then. It's important for adults and for youth to know and understand that Indigenous tribes are still here. It's not like they're gone and disappeared in history. We donate to an Ohlone land trust, so we don't want it to become performative because this is a practice that's becoming more popular, and I think overall it's good. But to make sure that we're just not doing it just to check boxes off, SEEDS dedicates, we donate money to the Ohlone land trust every year, and that money is used to buy back land and for programs for their people. Okay. We also do this out of respect because our restorative justice actually has a history that important. The form that's practiced in the Bay Area, the form of RJ that's practiced has a lot of roots in Tlingit and Tagish people of Canada. The Navajo Nation's justice ceremony has lots of elements of RJ. The Maori people from New Zealand practice a justice system called Utu. The Kima system in pre-colonial Ghana had RJ roots, and the Hausa people of South Africa. The point of this is to demonstrate that restorative justice has a long history and origin that's been practiced around the world. If you think about it, we always sat in a circle around fires and what do we do at holidays? We sit around a table, we share, we commune, we problem solve that way. So this is just a reminder that restorative justice culturally has a long, diverse history. And I'm gonna show you a really short video that kind of describes that too. Actually, this is the video. And it's 4 minutes long. I don't think we're gonna watch all of it, but I really like this piece because A, it's student-centered, so it's a student-animated version about the history of RJ. And I like it because not only does it talk about RJ's cultural origins, but it also talks about the legal origins of restorative justice. So let's just watch this for a few minutes.
Though restorative justice and restorative practice are relatively new concepts, they are rooted in...
PDF that I shared, and the link should be active. It's only 4 minutes and like 50-something seconds. It's a really great video that goes into the history of RJ, how it was, the legal history of how it began to be incorporated in our legal system, like in the 70s, and how it's evolved, and now it's becoming more of a practice that schools are practicing. The fact that RJ is not really being implemented across the board is still kind of shocking to me, but we're trying to change that. So my apologies for not being able to show it to you, but definitely check it out. All right, we can be emergent, that's okay. All right, so what is restorative justice? It's an umbrella term that encompasses community building in response to harm. I really want to emphasize the community building piece because normally most folks think about restorative justice as being connected to harm circles. Like something happens, you get in a circle and you hash it out. And that's definitely a very important part of the work. But most of restorative justice is really around community building. We get calls all the time about schools who maybe they had something horrible happen and they call us and they want us to come in and do a harm circle. And so I start asking questions like, well, do you practice RJ? Do you do it as on a regular basis? And they're like, no. For us to come in and try and do a harm circle to figure out, to resolve an issue that's happened without the pre-work that needs to happen before that would cause actually more harm. Most of the work around restorative justice is doing restorative practices. It's building relationships within the community so that when something does happen, you can then sit down and have a harm circle and you can work it out. So this is one thing that I spend a lot of time explaining to schools. We'll get calls and the principals will want us to come in and just do a training or two to do RJ. And it really doesn't work like that because it's a paradigm shift. So if you want to solve a problem, you cannot solve it if you continue to think the same way you were thinking when you created it. So I talk about it being a paradigm shift all the time. It's like we have to do things differently. The session that I attended right before lunch was about dismantling the prison to school pipeline. That's huge. Our whole educational system is based on punishment. And in order for RJ to take place, we have to make a shift from that. So what shift am I talking about? Making the decision to become more restorative, to imagine a world where harm is addressed with restorative practices takes more than just learning new terminology. We have to really change and shift the way we think about conflict. The reality is that we're humans and we're always going to be in conflict. It's going to happen. So instead of taking the traditional route and either pushing people out or just punishing them, we embrace conflict when it happens because we view it as a way to heal and to repair relationships and to learn. And that's especially important when we're dealing with young people, okay? So thinking of conflict as a natural part of being in relationship with each other as a collective. The thing that I really like this last paragraph, part of what makes restorative practices feel so transformative is the decision to face the conflict and not avoid it, and to navigate it in a skillful way with the aim to repair and not win. So it's not about winning, it's not about revenge, it's not about punishing, it's about when a conflict happens, how can we use it as an opportunity to learn from it and to heal. Healing is huge. So when we work with schools, we really outline these as the overall goals. So since I'm talking so much, I would like for some volunteers to read the different bullets. So this is our list of goals when we work with schools around RJ implementation. Thank you.
Building community and creating a positive and inclusive school climate.
Can you pass it down? Do you mind if you want to pass?
shift school culture from punishment orientation to focus on healing.
Establish an environment of collaboration and mutual accountability between all school members.
Create alternatives to suspension and expulsion.
Address racial disproportionally.
Interrupt the criminalization of student behaviors.
So, as stated, it's been lovely going to different workshops all week that are purposely hitting all of these in different ways. So it's really, really encouraging to see. Does anyone have any questions about these goals? Yes.
My question is relatively new to restorative justice myself. I haven't practiced it in my classroom. One of them is to establish an environment of collaboration and mutual accountability between all school members. How does this work in environments of bullying and situations like that? And how does a restorative justice circle work in those contexts?
So if you have instances of bullying, as I stated earlier, in order to deal with that, so how do we implement this? We teach, there are two core things. We teach staff to learn how to do restorative practices, which pretty much encompass restorative communication skills, so how they interact with each other verbally, and circle practice too. So if you are in a situation where there's bullying occurring, the thing that we would want to work on is, like, first of all, what have you built your container? We call it a container. It's like, how have you built the needed relationships that you need to have in order to be able to deal with this sort of harm with your youth? I'm going to even back up a little bit more because you kind of jumped right into it. Is we first work with the staff. So that mutual accountability, I can't tell you how many times I've had principals call me up and they go, we want, we want our teachers to get restorative justice training. And I'm like, that's great, but it also means we're gonna do some leadership coaching too. And many times they're really taken aback by that because they view it as something that the staff or the teachers are doing. But if we've done this for long enough now, about 7, 8 years, to know and see that if it doesn't start from the top, and if it doesn't really meld into the entire culture and framework of the school, then it's not really gonna work. And so I'm very honest with school leaders. It's like, and districts, it's like, if you wanna do RJ implementation, it's a long-term process. It's a long-term dedication. Now, it does not mean that individual teachers can't make a difference. Like I was saying earlier, when I was a social studies teacher, I was doing RJ practices and I had no idea that's what they were. And so, of course, they can make a difference. One practice, even just common things, like I never had my classroom in rows. I just noticed the difference. It's like when we were in U's, it was in circles, but in U's, it was just more communal. It was easier for them to talk to each other, to communicate with each other. It was easier for me to kind of check in and get them back on task. So it really is. So I'm gonna go back to what I was saying before. Before we even start dealing with bullying, those things, it's looking at assessing how many restorative practices are you already doing? And acknowledging what is being done, and then coming in and providing support for the areas that do need shoring up. We usually, and I'm gonna get into that a little bit more too. Okay, any other questions? All right, so how do we do this work? It's a trifecta. We like pyramids and analogies, but this is one that we use a lot. So we want to implement restorative practices, and as I told you, a lot of that has to do with restorative communication. Restorative communication is just steeped in nonviolent communication techniques, impact statements, effective statements, so forth. And then, of course, circle practice. All right, And then we also let schools know that it's not feasible just to focus on restorative practices if you also haven't addressed the elephant in the room. You must look at the impact of power and privilege on marginalized identities. So when we do leadership coaching, we are having schools look at their data. Who's being suspended? Who's being disciplined? How often? By whom? And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes if the situation is really intense, we will recommend that they work with another organization to really just focus on that. We incorporate training around oppression and power in our trainings, but some schools need more of it. And then, of course, everything that we do should be trauma-informed. And, you would think that this would be the norm now, but I'm still amazed by how many schools that we work with, even though we just finished going through, well, we're still going through, this pandemic. Over the last few years, there's still many educators who aren't sure or understand what trauma-informed practices are, even though most of our kids, at some degree, are traumatized. So we like using this model because we know folks are familiar with it. So when we first begin to work with schools, we focus on tier 1. We've broken down the RJ implementation into different tiers. So we focus on tier 1, which is community building. It's the foundation. Okay, it's the foundation, where community members develop compassion and understanding through intentional conversation, sharing, and listening. So this is the first thing we focus on with leadership, the leadership team, with teachers, is how are you communicating with each other? How are you communicating with your youth? How are you building relationships with them? Do you know your kids? This is, pretty basic, but if you don't have that foundation, when harm does happen, you can't repair it because you haven't set the container yet, all right? Tier 2, that's harm circles. That's when, we tell teachers in schools that we want the staff and students to develop some circle muscle. Like, we want them to be comfortable being in circle. We want to make sure that relationships are healthy. And then once that starts, and once that's really developed, then we teach them how to do harm circles. And that's where you have a circle where, something has happened, and you identify the harm, and then you do circle practice to heal it. We have whole trainings just on how to do harm circles, because there's different kind. If you're out at the playground, some things don't really require a whole circle. Sometimes it's just a matter of just working it out on the spot. Sometimes things do require a formal harm circle. And when that happens, a lot of people don't realize this, you have to do pre-work. You don't just, depending on the issue, you don't normally just sit down and do a harm circle, like if someone has been harassed or, there's been a lot of history. You have to do pre-work. You have to do interviews before. You have to talk to folks, to participants, to make sure that they're actually accepting the responsibility for the harm. If you have a bully who is not accepting that they are a bully, you can sit in a circle and try and do a harm circle, but it's not going to work. So sometimes maybe you don't really know what happens and there's conflicting stories. Well, instead of doing an RJ circle, we might just do mediation. You do mediation when it's not clear and you're really trying to find out what happened and so forth. But when you do RJ work for healing, everyone, folks have to be able to accept responsibility. And that's why I was saying earlier that accountability is huge for restorative justice. I've heard people talk about restorative justice being soft and not really, kids get away with stuff. A lot of parents sometimes think that, and I'm like, no. You think about it, if you just kick a kid out of class and suspend them and they're home for a week watching TV because they've done something, how are they learning from that? How are they really taking responsibility for what they've done or the harm they've caused? As opposed to dealing with the situation within restorative justice means you really are getting them to see and understand the impact of their actions. And then tier 3 that's when, like, maybe a student was kicked out of school and had to come back for maybe something that was pretty egregious. Or they're going to a new school and they need to be re-entered into a new environment. Tier 3 usually happens with the administration on the top level, and it's usually rare. So it's the more common practices start at the bottom, and then they go up. This is another triangle, just so that you can see some of the activities that are identified with each level. And I know I'm going through this quickly, but you do have the PDF so that you can soak it in later. But Tier 1 includes empathetic listening, active language, community building circles, inclusive decision-making for administration, restorative dialogue, and impromptu conversations. So when we do trainings, we teach these techniques, and then we do a lot of role-playing so that teachers can get comfortable with implementing these strategies. And then Tier 2 is really around restorative dialogue, conflict mediation, responsive harm circles, and circles and COSAs, circles of accountability, support and accountability. All right? So, and then, as I said before, Tier 3 is formative, restorative conferencing, and reentry circles and practices. So, again, folks usually want to jump into Tier 2 or Tier 3, and we have to usually pull them back and go, no, we have to start with Tier 1. Any questions about this? All right, so I was gonna describe how to do circle, but instead of doing that, we're actually gonna teach you by us actually doing circle. So at this point, I'm gonna drag over a centerpiece. We do need to close the circle, so we're gonna have to, there shouldn't be any spaces in between. I'm gonna put this down. There's a ton of different ways to do circle, depending on your level. I've seen elementary teachers do circles masterfully, so very fun and creative. Middle school is quite often a challenge. Developmentally, they feel really awkward sometimes. You know, we sit in a circle. I'm sorry I didn't bring my table, but we pretend like that's in the middle. What's different about us doing this? I mean, ideally, if you can, I know sometimes this isn't possible, but if you can, you really want to be in chairs without a table. Why? Why do you think that's important? No barriers, okay? And this is really vulnerable. Like, there's nothing in between us. We're kind of exposing ourselves. And middle school kids, sometimes we find that they take the longest to adjust. It's doable, though. You just have to keep working at it, but they do take a little bit longer. I'm sorry, let me get my script. So the centerpiece is really important. I don't like calling it an altar because I feel like we're working in public ed and I don't want to scare anyone off, but you can totally decorate it any way you like. I've seen centerpieces that just had a basketball on it and that was fine for what they were doing. Some teachers like to make them appropriate for the month or around holidays. Sometimes you can allow students to do it. We like to say, you don't have to, but if you can maybe incorporate the different elements like fire, water, earth. There's some things down there that represent that. But the centerpiece is important because it's a focal point. And it can feel awkward doing this, so it gives everyone, and that's why this chair isn't ideal because I can't see it, but it gives everyone somewhere to look. The talking piece you probably heard about is used to indicate who has the floor. We're gonna use the microphone since it has a function too. But sometimes, you know, and circles can be done in all different ways too. Say you don't want it to go around. I love using a ball because then it can be more of a conversation. You can throw the ball around and have a dialogue that way. You can also, if you don't want to go in order, you can put the talking piece on the in the center circle, in the centerpiece, and folks can get up and take it if they want. You can have different centerpieces so that if something doesn't feel tactile, just feel right to, you know, a student, they can grab something else that does. Of course, we're being careful because of COVID and all that. Often I will have hand sanitizer too. All right, so that's the centerpiece. You usually start off with an opening. So I want to thank, and I have a script that I'm gonna read, and that's totally okay. This is a circle that was developed by one of our practitioners. So I want to thank everyone for participating. The topic for this circle will be values. So values come from our families, communities, neighborhoods, generations. Sometimes we keep the values we grew up with, and sometimes they're different. So ultimately, they are a guidepost to help us become our best selves. Restorative practices are rooted in values. So we talk a lot about values, and I know that schools usually have their values, but when we do this, we really try and individualize it. It's like, what's important to you? And the reason why this is important is because it's important for teachers to think about this. It's important for teachers to do this with their youth, because as you create agreements and norms, these norms should be based on what the collective values are. Just because you are the teacher doesn't mean that you should hold all the power in defining what the values are. You want buy-in, you want students to be, to feel connected to the class. That's what you're trying to do, is establish that container. And so you talk about values, it's really important, because then you can base your agreements. You can have another discussion about your agreements, and they should be based on your values. Or if you're going to talk to kids about goals and have maybe an activity around setting goals, their goals should be based on their values. And then this way too, later down the line, when Johnny starts bullying someone, when you have that conversation, you're going to bring it back to what the classroom values are. Instead of just saying, don't do that. Like, well, if it was that easy, they wouldn't do it. But you're really trying to make those connections. So what I want you to do, before we start, this is not going to be a full circle because we don't have time. In fact, how much time do we have? Can someone tell me? Yeah, so we have 25 minutes. That's great. Okay, that's enough time. So normally when you do circle, you have a theme. I highly recommend that you start doing community building circles. The packet that I left is basically, there's a template and there's instructions on how to do circle practice, okay? I would start off by doing one big group, and I know that's a lot at first, but once they get comfortable, then you can break it off. And the youth love being circle keepers. Oh, and I'm the circle keeper. I didn't talk about that. So you have a circle keeper, and it usually starts off being the teacher. You have to change hats. You want them to feel comfortable being able to share. So your role as the circle keeper isn't to facilitate per se. You're just trying to make sure that things are going smooth, that you know, that you're keeping the flow, but you're not dictating. And you know what I mean. Like, you have to make sure that you make that shift. And you should participate too. So don't do a circle if you're not willing to get vulnerable and to share also. It's really important. So it's really, so when doing community building circles, it's fun to do an icebreaker. So we don't have time to do an icebreaker, but I'm sure you all know of fun things that you can do. I love doing this with teachers because they don't ever have time to really do that sort of thing. And so having them share and do fun activities is really, really great to watch. But you would start with an icebreaker. And it doesn't have to be seated. So you can have them, like if it's in the middle of the day and things are kind of slow, like now, I would do an energizer, something that's gonna get folks moving. After that, you wanna do a check-in. So we are gonna do a check-in question, okay? Check-in question should be low risk, fun, easy for folks to answer, okay? The check-in question today will be, as a kid, what was your favorite breakfast food? And if it's not breakfast food, if it doesn't have to be like a traditional breakfast food. What did you eat in the morning? And it's important to state that because some cultures don't have breakfast per se. So what's the first thing you eat in the morning? So just make sure that your questions are inclusive, okay? So if you could just maybe state your name and what your favorite breakfast foods are. So my name is Dr. Congrave-Wilson, and although I don't eat sugary cereals now, my favorite breakfast food when I was a kid was Crunch Berries, Captain Crunch Berries.
My name is Angelica Fernandez, and I've always liked eggs.
Rose and Fruit Loops.
Melanie, rice and something else.
Brian, I never ate breakfast as a kid growing up. I couldn't eat before school, but I would go with bacon nowadays.
This is Manju, and I don't like to eat breakfast. Yeah, just I eat the lunch.
Hi, I'm Hamakshi, and I like to eat dhokla, that is a steamed rice and lentil breakfast.
My name is Sean, and as a child, I would always eat cereal. I liked the sugary ones, but my mom was more of a health nut, so it was usually Cheerios or something like that.
My name is Stephanie. My favorite breakfast food growing up was like leftovers of my mom's homemade soup.
My name is Jana, and my favorite breakfast food growing up was Eggo waffles smothered in butter and syrup. My mom used to go to Costco and buy the big thing of syrup for me because I just loved it. She thought if I ate, more of it, I'd get over it at some point, but I still love it. I don't eat it, but I still love it.
I'm Amy, and my favorite breakfast food is also waffles.
Marissa, and I think my favorite breakfast when I was a kid was probably like fruit and oatmeal and stuff with the cream.
Okay, so before we go on, why do you think check-ins are important? Why not just jump into it? Everyone got to use their voice. Yeah, kind of like breaking the ice. Was the question hard? No, you want to make it so that, everyone can answer easily. And this brings up a question we always get is, should you make people participate? Within RJ, we really try and make it so that it's voluntary, that it's volunteer-based. We have this social change window that we talk about all the time, that we want to do things with people, not for or forcing them to. And so, I would allow students to pass. If you find that the same student is passing all the time, then that's something that you want to talk to them about later and just find out what would make them more comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say what I do in breakfast. Yeah, well, that's why I was saying that I know that some folks and cultures don't eat what we think of breakfast foods. I mean, breakfast is really just the first meal of the day. You're breaking your fast. But just making sure that your questions are open enough so that everyone can participate. And it's a great way for students to learn about each other too, right? I think it's cool for students to realize that everyone doesn't eat eggs and bacon for breakfast, that it's other things too. Yeah. All right, so so check-ins are really important. They don't have to be long, but it's something that you want to, do. And again, in the packet that I give you, there's a lot of suggestions for what fun things that you can talk about and do. Mm-hmm. Okay. You can, students can pass, and then because sometimes they just can't think on the spot. And then after you're done, after you go around, you can go back to that person and say, hey, do you passed before? Do you want to respond now? And if not, it's okay. So did we pass any? Yeah. Another thing too, I'm just gonna infuse is I get asked all the time whether or not like children who are on the spectrum or with different disabilities can participate, and absolutely. I've seen circles done where teachers use hand signals sometimes for kids who might not be very auditory. So there's different, whatever the accommodations are, you figure out how to incorporate it. So it's super inclusive, and you can definitely, you know, like I said, I've seen really great circle work with teachers who really help. If anything, it really helps students be able to identify their feelings. So doing emotional check-ins is a really common practice for elementary teachers for RJ, because then that way you can kind of know, you know, you gauge where they're at in the beginning of the day so that you know whether or not a student might need more support or whatnot. All right? All right, so the, yeah.
But then at the end of class, I like went to her and I asked about why she passed, and she said she had social anxiety. And then I just asked for her answer, and she was able to share with me. And then just checking in the next time she shared. So I feel like it's really important to check in.
Okay. All right. So the topic for this circle, I said before, are values. And normally I should have told you to bring a piece of paper, and I didn't. So that's okay. We're going to be emergent and just do a variation of it. I want you to think about some values that you think are important to have at your school site or your organization if you're not at a school, okay? Think about a value. I mean, I'm sure you've been going to the conference this week and you've been all inspired. Think about maybe a value or a practice that maybe you didn't do that well last year. Last year was tough. We were so excited about everyone coming back after the pandemic, and then woo, we realized that, you know, students had been in their room all year, isolated, and so they came back with lots of issues and had to remember how to be in school again. So I want you to think about last year. I know it was really tough. What's something, a value or a practice that you don't think you maybe did as well as you wanted to? I want you to think about a value or a practice that you're really inspired by. Let's see. So think about a value or a practice you struggled with. Think about one that you think you did really well. Okay, it's like it was tough, but you went in there and you did really well. And then I want you to think about something that maybe, and this is a little bit different, that's from what's on there on the screen, but think about something, a value or a practice that you're inspired to do from this week, from this conference. Because that's the whole point of why we're gathered here, right? Is to be inspired, to learn new things, and then to implement them, okay? So I want you to go around. We're gonna do, you know, we only have maybe a minute or so, so you don't have a long time, but I want you to choose one of those values and talk about it really briefly with us. Maybe it's something that you struggled with, and it's like, you know, you wanna do better in that area. Or again, maybe it's something that you did really well and you want to share that because you know, you really rocked it. And then maybe it's something that you're inspired to do this week, okay? So I'm gonna skip just because of time, but we're gonna actually start this way this time. And if you wanna pass, you can. There's no pressure, okay? So again, your name?
Marissa, and for me, I'm a new teacher, and one of the things that I'm inspired to do is, I know that I get so consumed with doing a good job that I need to stop and take a step back and like stop focusing on myself, you know, when I'm teaching my classes, or focusing on, you know, what I'm supposed to be getting them to do, you know, or yeah, what like good teaching is supposed to look like. And, yeah. It
would also be helpful too if you let us know what you teach, what you do.
Oh, I am a 6th grade SAI teacher.
Thank you.
I'm Amy, and I a value that I struggled with was similar, actually, to what Marissa just mentioned. I had I focused heavily on doing my work and getting the task finished, and didn't slow to listen. And I value listening deeply. And so I could have done better at listening to the people around me. And I feel like that would have improved a lot of things around me. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Jana, and I'm an English teacher. And so a little bit of background, I'm, in a new teaching context this year. I'm teaching in a full inclusion classroom. So we have kids in our district who would normally be designated basic all the way up through honors in a single class, which is a beautiful thing. So, and it's really gotten me to think a lot about my instructional practices in the past and what I could have been doing better. And the thing that I'm really wanting to work on is making sure that everything that I do in the classroom allows all students access, and redesigning what I do and how I approach lessons and how I approach assessments, so that there's multiple different ways to show mastery and that all students have access to that. So that's what I'm doing this year, is expanding everything that I do. So thank you.
I'm Stephanie Pham. I also teach English with Jana at McDonald High School. I'm really inspired by Dr. Emden, especially when he was talking about how students need to heal and recover their dignity, their self-love, and being full and whole. And I just want to work towards that this school year.
Hi, I'm Sean, and I'm an instructional coach. And one thing that I see a lot of our community struggling with is acceptance of who our students are. And I think what resonated with me is that asset over deficit analogy that Mr. Shelton brought today. And I just want to shift our language and our mindset to looking at the strengths that our students and our staff members and all of us bring to the game.
Hi, this is Manju, and I am preschool teacher, and now I am doing home daycare in my home. Doing this conference, I learn a lot. It's like that taking too much things to do, but one thing's definitely I will do, like rushing around everything to do at the same time. So taking a smaller step one time. So every month I'm thinking to make the one goal and then do it, not so many things and do it, not anything. So that is things.
My name is Brian. I teach special education, high school, math too. I guess I don't know if it's a value thing, but it's something I learned while I was here. I guess that I definitely struggle with and want to work on would be like a positive language thing, and not so much about like being down on the kids or anything like that, but more like the language you use when describing like the students within IEPs and stuff like that, and using like positive descriptions for maybe behaviors that need to improve, but using positive like descriptions, stuff like that. So that's something I've been kind of thinking about since like I saw it yesterday, which I don't know. It was just one thing that really resonated with me the last couple of days. So something that I think I struggle with and want to like work on and try to uphold a little better.
My name is Melanie, and this is my second year of being an inclusion support specialist at our school. And at our school, we have shared values of trust, respect, and responsibility. And so far, the one that I've seen really that I struggled with is responsibility. where do you draw the line to make the kids take responsibility or give them an excuse of, you know what, they're struggling with all these things that are happening, mental health, emotional challenges that they're dealing with. So, and I think that's where, like working in the classroom, supporting teachers, supporting students, you know, for me, that's the struggle. Okay, what do we do next? How do we encourage the students to, you know what, don't find excuses, but take responsibility for the actions that you're supposed to do?
Let's see. I'm Rose, an elementary school teacher, SDC 345, Mod Severe. And I think where I've done well is acceptance of where my students are when they have come. Where I have struggled is the acceptance of district policy and what I expect from administration and other sort of people in position of power have created a lot of irritation, and I find myself very unforgiving when it comes to who I think should be doing better. So that's where I'm trying to give a little leniency, what is really challenging for me.
My name is Angelica Fernandez. I also teach an SDC class, moderate to severe, middle school. So once, like just like her, accepting the students. The only thing is that we have so many personalities out there, so many ways of expressing, and I think that's one thing that I value. You know, the students being able to express. What I got from this today is also today and these days that I was here, different ways that they can express themselves. And that's, I think, where we draw the line with special needs. You know, there's different ways. There's not only one way fits all, nonverbal or verbal. And there's so many things out there, even the students with the spectrum. Hearing the poem on Tuesday kind of gave me an opening. You know, sometimes it's like the passing. Either you want to speak or you can pass, or you can have a different way that you can express themselves, because you see some of the kids in the spectrum that they have communication, you know, they can able to express, they're so smart, so bright, and then as a teacher, you're like, okay, I need to get that out. How can I do it? And just kind of offering them different ways of expressing themselves.
It was so hard trying to decide what to do in this hour because, like I said, half of our practice is teaching restorative communication techniques. And I feel like so much of what many of you spoke on would have been addressed by that too. But just know that your relationships with the kids are key. We know from research that kids do better if they think you care about them. So if you want to help them and stop negative behavior or have high expectations of them regarding, you know, their work, you really do have to have a relationship with them. So we don't have time to do it, but if we did do a round two, I would ask you, how do you build relationships with your students and families? And just, you know, I hopefully you got some other tips from other workshops. I know that, you know, I'm going to go back and definitely expand our program development by incorporating some of these ideas. But just think about how do you build community with your kids and families, because that really is the basis. You'll be able to do everything else that you're talking about if you're able to do that. So this went by really quickly. And I want to leave, and there's so much, like really, we didn't even scrape the iceberg. This is just like, how many of you have already do circle practice? We're starting. Okay. Yeah. Again, make sure you take the packet. You have it online, but there's hard copies here too. And there's a ton of great stuff online too about circle practice. But just doing it, the frequency, how you do it, all of that can vary. But just start. Just start. Are there any questions? Mm-hmm.
Do you usually do multiple rounds for one circle?
It's common. I mean, you can do as many or as little as you want, but usually there's an icebreaker, check-in, and then a couple of rounds, and then you always want to do a closing. You're really trying to establish the idea that circle is like a sacred, special place for you all. So you don't want to, you want to treat it that way. So you have an opening, you can use songs, lyrics, quotes. I did this really fast, but if I had more in time, I would have been more intentional. I usually like closing with a quote, lyrics, and get me, let them do it. Once kids start doing it, they love the responsibility because then they'll be able to share what they like. So just being very intentional about that. But if you don't have time, you can, and you can also use circle as a teaching method too. Mm-hmm. If that's going to help you do it, yes, I would definitely encourage that, because then kids will know that it's coming. And at first, again, if there's hesitancy, sometimes kids who are introverted, it's going to be, they're going to have to develop this. But yeah, I would say have it scheduled so that they know it's coming, and be very intentional about how you're doing it. It's already online. I did make a few changes to it, but yeah, if they email me too, I can send it again. It's in the app. So there's a circle template, so it's an empty one that you can fill in to plan circles, and then I gave you a packet. It's 10 pages out of our RJ manual that we normally give to. I wanted to do the whole thing. My boss was like, no. I'm like, oh, let's just give them the whole manual. So I did 10 pages, which is a whole chapter about, circle practice. And a lot of, we usually get questions about like what to ask. So there's a bunch of different stems, like, check-in stems and stuff that you can do, and topics. You want to make it fun. You want to start off that way. And then, they'll start fulfilling a role. Like if you have a death in the family of one of your kids, you can circle up around that. Circles are beautiful. They'll be a way for you to really be able to, communicate and connect with your students. If you're an administrator, it's a good way to do meetings, to start meetings sometimes. Instead of doing a traditional, meeting, you circle up. So, and that's what we teach principals who are doing this. It's like you have to model it. And it's... Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we really encourage school leaders to model it, and that can be the biggest barrier. It's like we come in and we usually pretty quickly can just see like there's some issues going on. And so the kids are very perceptive. You can't try and do one thing with them if they don't see you all doing it too. Oh my God, I'm so bummed that I didn't. I should have provided more links. We have video. We work with a school, a French-American school in Berkeley, and we did a video, and there's like a pre-K teacher who just talks about doing, yeah, and so again, if, so imagine if we continue to do it so that middle school, they're able to identify their feelings and work out their, we're getting a lot of requests now from schools to create peer mediation programs where they get in conflict. And peer mediation is different from restorative justice, but we're also getting requests for us to help the staff train the kids how to become circle leaders. So it's happening, it's exciting. And I mean, we're so busy, and it's schools coming to us because they've recognized that just punishing the kids and sending them home for a week is not doing anything. So yeah, it's about bringing them in. I did my dissertation for my doctorate on a master teacher, and it turned out my conclusion was that she was a master restorative justice practitioner. After 7 years, she never kicked one kid out of her class ever. If they messed up, she brought them in closer. They would have to come in at lunch and like help, like, and she would talk to them while they were clean, you know, like. So it really, it's more work and it's harder because quite often you do want to like, but we know that that just leads to the pipeline. We have to dismantle that, not disrupt, but dismantle. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please, I feel like there's, obviously wasn't enough time, but hopefully you just got a little bit of taste. All right. Thank you. Thank you.